Okay. I'd like to welcome, my name is Adrienne Laris, by the way, and good evening and welcome, and sorry for the technical difficulties in getting the program started. But anyway, I am Adrienne Laris. I'm the president of the Mountaintop Historical Society, and I'm delighted you are joining us for this first virtual presentation of our 51st season. Thank you for joining us. There may be a few people who are joining us from outside the area, but we are located in Haynes Falls at the top of the Catskill Clove. Our mission is to discover, preserve, interpret, and share the unique history of the Catskill Mountain region. We have a 50-plus acre campus. We are the home of the 1913 Ulster and Delaware train station, which is on the National and Historic State Registries. We have a visitor center with an archive that contains some 7,000 artifacts. We are the western trailhead of the Catskill Rail Trail that leads to the historic and famed Catskill Falls. Many of our programs follow our signature approach and combine history with hiking. Our full listing of our programs for 2024 will be available on our website at www.mths.org. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram for postings and updates as well. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Historical Society members who are participating this evening. Our members are important partners in the work of the Historical Society. I'd also like to thank Stewart Shops for supporting the Zoom app that makes this virtual program possible. Tonight, in honor of Black History Month, we are pleased to present the story of the Mondore family of Prattsville in a talk by Richard Sears Walling. Johanna Titus, and Mountaintop Historical Society board member and chairperson of our program committee, will be our moderator and will introduce Mr. Walling and his talk shortly. Our next virtual program is on March 1st. We are tapping into a virtual program of the Clinton Historical Society of Oneida County for a talk by Professor Nancy Siegel on Susie Barstow and the women artists of the Hudson River School. I have heard her speak in person on this topic. She is excellent. Her curation of an exhibit at Cole House on Susie Barstow last fall was featured in a large article in the Washington Post. Now, just some housekeeping. By now, most of us are familiar with Zoom. Questions, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. If you have any difficulties, please send a message by the Q&A and we will try to troubleshoot. Individual videos are disabled and microphones are muted. Chat is also disabled. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Johanna Titus, a longtime resident of the Hudson Valley and the Catskills and a member of the Mountaintop Historical Society's Board of Directors. She is the chairperson of our program committee and is responsible for planning our diverse programs and presentations on topics of historical interest. Johanna is a journalist and author with her husband, Robert. Johanna authored several books, including The Hudson Valley in the Ice Age, The Catskills in the Ice Age, and The Catskills, a Geological Guide. And hot off the press, literally, I think today, they're just published The Hudson River School of Art and its Ice Age Origin. It's available from Purple Mountain Press. Pardon my stumbling. Johanna, please take it away.
Thank you, Adrienne. We're honored tonight to have Richard Sears Walling with us. He is the son of two World War II officers and is a graduate of Rutgers University. Go Scarlet Knights. He has dedicated his life to history, historic preservation, and humanitarian causes. His primary work is in African American and Native American history and genealogy. He is the author of numerous books, including My Year in France, about a Harlem Hell Fighter, and Edward and Eleanor and the Wages of Sin, about the infamous 1922 double homicide of a minister and his lover in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I got to read that one. Richard was the acting president of the Stamford Historical Society and is employed by the Circle of Life Ambulance Service in Hobart. In 2022, he traveled at his own expense to Poland, where he helped transport families from Ukraine to safety in Poland and Germany. Just a reminder before we start, please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll retrieve them. And I'm sure Mr. Walling will try to answer them as best he can when the program is ended. So I thank Mr. Walling for coming and welcome him.
Thank you very much, Johanna. This presentation, Johanna will be handling the slideshow slides, and please pardon me in advance for saying next repeatedly. So Johanna, whenever you're ready. Okay, so Juneteenth has just recently become a national holiday, and we have a connection here with the men of the 20th United States Colored Infantry Regiment. Now, this regiment was formed in 1864, 1 year after the infamous draft riots, and we will come back to this regiment as we go along exploring the history of the Mondore and related families. But we do have a connection. The Catskills have a connection to what happened in Galveston, Texas in 1865. Next. So history, memory becomes mythology. Next. For example, we all know that there was Washington crossing the Delaware River, and that became a memory of an event that helped turn the tide of the American Revolution. And of course, as the years went by, that memory became mythology. And here's Emanuel Leutz's famous painting of Washington boldly standing in the boat as they crossed the ice-choked Delaware River. And being a native New Jerseyan, I can tell you it looks nothing like that. And of course, we know that Washington did not stand in the boat, and neither was there the most famous representation of a flag of the American Revolution, the so-called Betsy Ross flag, but it evokes the mythology that is our American Revolution. Next. So history becomes memory, memory becomes mythology, and very often history, memory, mythology is obscured and oftentimes forgotten, and that is the crux of our program this evening. Next. So tonight we talk about the lost Mondore village of Prattsville, New York. This is from March 1861. We have, for a small inland town, a large number of uncommon free Negroes, male and female. That's the bullet of an article published in a local paper on the just on the eve of the American Civil War. And we'll explore the lost Mondore village in this presentation. Next. So here's a map showing the Appalachian Mountains, and of course they have to include the Adirondacks, but that's fine. And this was the frontier, and in many respects still retains its frontier atmosphere or environmental setting. It's a rugged upland chain of mountains. You could go to Kentucky or even Georgia and think that you were up in Vermont or even here in the Catskills. Very mountainous, intersected by river stream valleys and so forth. And this was, as being along the frontier, a site of blended communities along that frontier. For example, here in the Catskills, we have the Mondores and the related Helicus and Bacon families. That's the topic of tonight's conversation. We have the Ramapo Mountain people, They are a triracial group. They're Native American, African American, and white. And we have the Melungeons of the South. And here's a picture of a Melungeon family from the Southern Appalachians. And there's even talk that Abraham Lincoln's mother may have been of Melungeon descent. These are all biracial and often triracial groups along the frontier where people mixed, married, had families with very little incidence of any racial stereotyping or racial incidents whatsoever. But there is one notable exception, which we'll come to later in the program. Next. So the father of the generations of the Mondores was a man named Joel Mondore. Likely Joel came from the Caribbean and the triangle trade that he worked for. He was not a slave, but he worked for a man named Ezra Reed, originally from Norwalk, Connecticut. His wife, Sarah Kellogg, her family was involved with trade in the Caribbean. Reed moved to Amenia, Dutchess County in 1763, and he was involved with the steelworks during the Revolution. He served in the militia, and he moved to Coxsackie in 1788, the same year as the manumission of Joel's wife and son. Next. Now, here's just a little bit about the Kellogg's and a clip from that work. And at the bottom, I'll read it. In selling these Indian captives into slavery, the colonists were but following the example of other nations. For example, at the time of the English wars, numbers of Scots were brought to America and sold. And at one time, in fact, Scots, Indians, and Negroes were not allowed to train in the militia in Massachusetts. Slavery lingered in New England until after Revolutionary days, and it is said that its death blow was given in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1783, when a citizen was tried for beating his Negro servant and convicted, notwithstanding his plea that the black man was a slave. Next. So here's the infamous triangle trade. Molasses to rum to slaves was how it was presented in the movie musical 1776. And from the colonies to New England and back to the west coast of Africa, to the Caribbean, and to the east coast of the 13 colonies. It was highly profitable. On each leg of the journey, the holds of each ship was filled with either cargo or human cargo. And it's part of the development of the Western Hemisphere as colonial outposts for Europe. The slave population in Connecticut in the 1770s was just over 6,000, most of whom came from the Caribbean. Merchants and clergymen often had slaves. It was a middle-class phenomenon in that state and in New England in general. Mondore is a French name, and the French colonies in the Caribbean were part of the triangle trade, and there are still Mondores there with roots in both St. Lucia and Martinique, and I've had the opportunity to speak with Mondore family members in the Caribbean, but they don't know much of their family history beyond their grandparents. Next. So in 1788, we have this notice, Dutchess County, State of New York, this may certify that Joel Mondore, a Negro man, formerly a servant of Ezra Reed and his wife, now a slave to the said Ezra Reed, and their son Jeduthan, a slave to the said Ezra Reed, who is disposed to manumit the said slaves, and it appears to us that they are under the age of 50 and of sufficient ability to maintain themselves and of good moral character. So here we have the manumission of Joel's wife and son. The legend of the Mondores states that his wife was Native American, and well into the American Revolutionary days, there was still a large Native American presence in New England, including Connecticut and the oblong area between Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York State. And based on census data, the birth date for Jeduthan is about 1776. Next. So from Amenia, Dutchess County to Middletown, Delaware County, and then to the south of Grand Gorge and to Negro Hill near Prattsville. Armenia is at the bottom right. The red line goes in a northwesterly direction to Middletown near Arkville, and then sets of sons of Jeduthun the first settled in the Grand Gorge area and Negro Hill near Prattsville. Next. So the census is very important. In 1790, Joel Mondore is in a household with 3 free persons of color, his wife and his son, Jeduthun the first. In 1800, Jeduthun, his son, the number of people living in the home is illegible, unfortunately. In 1810, we have Jeduthun Mondore and 7 free people of color, his wife and his children. In 1830, we still have Jeduthun. We have 2 males under the age of 10, 1 male the age of 10 to 23, 1 male age 36 to 54, that's Jeduthun, 1 female under the age of 10, and his wife Eve between the ages of 24 and 35. So Jeduthun I and his son are in Middletown by 1830. His son Jeduthun II buys land in lot 32 in 1840. His brother Alonzo buys land in 1847 from a Massachusetts merchant, also on lot 32, not far from the Arkville Cemetery on present-day Route 30. That is over near the recreation center on the outskirts of Arkville and the other community right there. Next. So here is a map from the mid-1800s showing Margaretville. That was a name that briefly escaped my mind. And the red circle is the cemetery. On the left is the gravestone of Jeduthun. The inscribed part has slid off over the years, but we do have a transcription of it. And next to him is the grave of Eve. So Jeduthun and his wife Eve are buried, and another Mondore, a descendant, is also buried in that cemetery. Next. So the children of Jeduthun and Eve, we're not going to go into all of these people, but only touching upon them. So Jeduthun II was born in 1805. He moved to Philly by 1840. There he had children. His descendants are still in the Philadelphia area. Henry had legal trouble, and he disappears from the record after 1835. He was caught pickpocketing a man on a steamboat between from the Hudson River down to New York City. Joel moved from Roxbury to Prattsville. We'll learn more about him. Harriet is the only daughter. She married twice, a man named Bacon and a man named Proper. Alonzo married late in life and had many children. Charles had legal troubles and served in the Civil War. And Ransom, he lived the longest at Negro Hill in Roxbury. Next. So, again, a map from the 1800s. Land at Lot 8, which is circled on the left-hand side, was mortgaged by Jeduthun and Charles in 1847. Joel is at the site next to D. Merwin, which is marked by the red star, and that became known as Negro Hill. And of course, I must add, prior to it being called Negro Hill, it used the slur word, which was not uncommon. But now on USGS maps, it is still identified as Negro Hill. And that was really the homestead for generations of the family. And Merwin was a white neighbor whose daughter married one of the Mondore brothers, and we'll learn about her in just a moment. Next. So here's a topo map. You can see at the top left is Negro Hill, and to the right of that is a rectangle with a little arrow. That's the homestead site and the burial ground. And those ruins are still there. It's very interesting. It's a set of foundations for a barn, a home, other outbuildings, and a burial ground. And just a short distance away across the river is the site of Mondore Village on Washington Street at the bend in the road. And over at what we call Pratt Rock was the farm of Alonzo Mondore and his sister Harriet Bacon, and also the same situation, foundations in the ground, also a burial ground. Next. And this is Prattsville in 1844. And you can see, looks a little bit different than today. The large building in the middle with the tall steeple, I was told that's the site of the post office. And there is a road that leads up into the hills to the right, and that is Washington Street. Next. So the Helicus family. The Helicus family had an early African-American presence in that area, the Prattsville area. A white Helicus family lived near Schoharie Valley in the 1700s. I don't know if it's Germanic or Dutch. I'm not sure. There was an unidentified black man during the American Revolution who, after a skirmish at Prattsville between the British and the local militia, a British officer was killed. That man reburied the British officer so as make sure his grave was not washed out by the river. There is early reference to a black man named Helicus in Prattsville from the 1810s. I presume, I don't know for sure, but I presume that the man who reburied the British officer was probably that same individual. And then a descendant, Alexander, also known as Sander Helicus, the family was in Windham in 1830. And we all know that Prattsville at one point was part of Windham at that time. And Joseph Helicus, his family was in Prattsville in 1840. Next. So let's talk about Joel for a moment. He married Sophronia Tyler, a white woman. They lived on Negro Hill by 1840 with one male child under the age of 10. And by 1855, he was in Prattsville at Mondore Village. And he had a number of children, which are listed here. And by the way, you can feel free to email me after this presentation. I'll give you more information if you wish. One of his sons was Madison. He served in the 51st New York Infantry. These people were biracial. The children were biracial. I do not use the word mulatto, which is found on the census records, because that really is a derogatory term based on the word mule. I prefer biracial or triracial, as the case may be. And Madison served in what would otherwise be determined a white regiment, the 51st New York Infantry. Joel lived in Stamford. He built a home. He was a mason. One of his sons worked for IBM, moved to the Binghamton area, and so forth. Many of these, or I should say some of these children were still alive into the 1940s, 1950s, and local people in Prattsville knew them and would visit them at their home. So that is still within living memory. Next. Harriet. Harriet was the only daughter of Judith I. She married twice. She is in Prattsville with Shepard Bacon and their children. Shepard Bacon disappears from the record. We don't know what happened to Shepard. I assume, well, I don't know. It probably passed away. In 1860 and 65, she's living there with her brother Alonzo, which we will learn more about in just a moment. 1875, she's living with her brother Jeduthan II, who came back from Philly. In 1880, she's listed with her husband Hiram Proper, who was a white man. All of the people's names in yellow served in the American Civil War. They had a number of children. She had a number of children: Caslin, Anne, Leander, Sarah, Henry. This is from the 1865 census, I believe. And all of Addie, the granddaughter, Oliver, a grandson, Isaac Helicus is a son-in-law, and he also served in the Civil War. Next. So, where do we find information about the past? From a number of sources, thankfully, many of which are now online. Much more are still in the archives, but online is a very useful place to search. So this is the title page of an 1865 court case about a land dispute next to the Big Rock at Prattsville. That is where 23 and 23A split just before the bridge as you head east. And now, of course, it's just an empty lot. But that rock was there. And I've talked with people who remember seeing it there. So that's the Big Rock. And that plays into the account we're about to review. Next. So there was a dispute about a triangular piece of land, which is at the upper right on this survey map. And the survey map shows the Turnpike Road is 23. The road that goes to the north is also goes up towards Wyndham. And there's the bridge there. The road's not shown on the other side of the bridge, but we know this area very well. There's a tavern there, long gone. But on the upper part of this map, we will see some more information. Next. So here's a detail. Again, at the lower left, left of center is the old tavern stand. And on the upper left lot is the land belonging to Mondore and Bacon. That's Alonzo Mondore and Harriet Bacon, brother and sister. The Bacon family still owns that land almost 200 years later. Next. Again, here's a close-up of that. And this, again, is from an 1860s court case that took testimony from people who had lived in the area for literally generations. Next. And looking from Pratt Rock down to Prattsville. And there is the church there. I believe it's a Methodist church. Right in that vicinity, one of the Mondore sons built a home in the early 1900s. But the Mondores lived in various homes along Main Street in Prattsville, in addition to the family farm up on the Pratt Rock Mountain. Next. So here's another map. I think this is from the 1860s, as I recall. So Prattsville is at the left. Mondore Village is at the upper left. The Mondore Farm is the rectangle at an angle. And we see the road system, 23A and 23, the Pratt Rocks themselves and the spring next to it, which I went looking for one day and could not find. But I have climbed that area, and the gentleman took me to the site of the Mondore Farm, and it's very interesting up there. Next. So this is from that court case, and at left is just a description of the land bought by Alonzo Mondore and Harriet Bacon, brother and sister, in 1847, recorded in 1854. So we have on the upper right, there's testimony that shows that there was a Helicus man living near Pratt's Rock circa 1810, 1815, and I'll just read it briefly. Peter I. Brandow was here recalled for defendant and testify. I am in my 64th year. I moved on the Swart property with father. I was 12 or 14 years old. Have been to school in the old schoolhouse. Wagner lived there twice. Helicus, Hugaboom, Snyder lived there. Must have been occupied it 10 or 12 years. They paid rent to father. Most of that time, I know that the people occupied it only as a garden. Think wood was got off for the schoolhouse. Left the Swart property somewhere about the year 1818. So the black man named Helicus was living there circa 1810. Next. An interesting part of the state records are and also the federal records are the agricultural statistics. Here we have 1865, 1880, and 1880 again, one for Alonzo, one for Harriet. They had split their lot, each having about 50 acres of land, approximately. And oats, winter rye, buckwheat, potatoes, hops, apple trees, one calf, two cattle, two milk cows, etc. So basically, if you drive through the Catskills, you'll see meadows and farmland up on the sides of mountains, and that's exactly what they had at that time. Now, of course, that mountain is just covered with trees, but back then it was all in active agriculture, either as pasture land or in crop. Now, what's interesting, in 1892, only Alonzo's 50-acre farm is listed in the census. But again, the Bacon family, and they would be the nieces and nephews of Alonzo, they still own that land on that mountain. Next. So here's the 1855 state census for Prattsville. Now we're going into the nitty-gritty of Mondore Village. These are the families that live there. Joel Mondore lived in a log house. He was born in Dutchess County, the son of Jeduthan I. He's a farmer. Sophrina Mondore, she is not identified by race, but that is left blank. The children are listed as biracial. Madison, they're born in Greene County, which is on that side of the county boundary. Next door, also in a log house, is Harriet Bacon. And Shepherd Bacon is no longer listed, but Harriet is, she's 42 years old in 1855. Those are her children. And she's living with her brother Alonzo, age 33, and he's also a farmer. Now, much of that farmland was up on top of the mountain, not in the actual village itself. Next. And then next door, we have the Helicus family. We have Sippy Helicus. Sippy was the nickname, and he lived in a frame house. And here we have his children all listed. And also next door is the mill owner named Henry A. Grote. Now, Henry A. Grote had married into the Mondore Helicus family. So let me reiterate very strongly. The black family who moved to this area by 1830, 1840 to the Prattsville area, and also earlier to Arkville, Margaretville, when the men and women of that family fell in love, they fell in love with their neighbors. The neighbors happened to be white. And so we had blended families going back to the very early 1800s here in the Catskills. And Prattsville happened to be the epicenter for that group and community of blended families. Next. And the mills at Prattsville on Hunters Creek Hunter's Field Creek, I'm sorry. Now it's just all the backyards of homes that are on Washington Street. But these are the mills at Prattsville Falls. And they're also called the Middle Falls. When I gave this program at a previous presentation in Prattsville, somebody said, oh, it's not called the Middle Falls. Well, that is how it's identified on maps. But that's what it looks like today. It's actually well, I shouldn't talk to you folks about waterfalls, but it's a very nice series of cascading waterfalls at one time which powered mills, and Grote owned part of that mill complex. Next. So here we have the 1865 census. We have 4 related families living on the outskirts of Prattsville, which is Greene County. Again, we have Joel and Sophronia, his wife, who this time is listed as white, and their children. And next door we have Sippy Helicus and his children, son-in-law and grandchildren, and also a servant. And that is a biracial family. And 2 sons are in the Army. Madison was also in the Army, but that's not shown. And next. We have Charles Mondore, his wife Betsy, who was white, Mary, and he also had a son named Alonzo. Let me just talk about Charles for a quick moment. Charles had gotten into a lot of legal trouble. He did time in the state prison. It looks like he was released so that he could join the Army, or maybe he had served his sentence. There was, he was a local man who was constantly in trouble and a bit of a sore thumb in the community. In fact, in this 1865 census, which was taken by a man who had lost a son during the Civil War, the man noted in the margins about Madison Mondore, the son of Joel, a fine man. When he wrote about Charles Mondore, he wrote in the side margins, somebody should shoot this man. That was the reputation that Charles had. But you will see later that his wife Betsy purchases more land within what was called Mondore Village. And finally, we have the sister, Harriet Bacon, and her children and her grandchildren, brother-in-law, and brother and son-in-law. Isaac Helicus was also in the Army. And at the top, we'll see Mary Mondore, the child of Charles, was living in New York City at that time. Next. So here we have Prattsville in 1867. We see Prattsville Falls and Mr. Grote right over there. And above that, we have the home of Charles Mondore. That's the C. Mondore. That's Charles, the man I just talked about, who was always getting into legal trouble. And in 1874, Alonzo Mondore was also living there. And across the street was the Sippy place. And just above that is Joel Mondore. So we were looking at what was known as Mondore Village. Next. A little bit about Alonzo. Alonzo was the brother of Harriet and had been living with Harriet. We'll just read this little clip at the bottom. While Lon Mondore was drawing wood at the top of Pratt's Rocks, Prattsville, one of his oxen slipped off the edge of the precipice, but was held by the yoke and the other ox. The yoke was removed, the ox fell off and was killed, and that's 1881. Now, Alonzo, we'll read about him in the next slide, but he was listed twice in 1850. In 1875, his household includes Addie and Oliver Bacon, a.k.a. Helicus. Those were the grandchildren of Harriet. And in 1885, he received a pension for his Civil War service. And in 1897, a little foreshadowing, he's described as the owner of the kidnapper's house on nearby Negro Hill. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's Alonzo Mondore. And all of these folks, many of these folks, are buried in the Prattsville and Grand Gorge cemeteries. Next. So here's a little bit about Alonzo, and it's from the Windham Journal, 1873. And it's Amalgamation of Races, Prattsville, the Field of Operations. Some of our readers may know that near Prattsville in Roxbury town, for many years, have lived several families of Negroes by the name of Mondore. 3 brothers, each living with white women. Some say they were married, others say not. However, large families grew up around them, and some of the children are nearly white and others are very black. It is said the mothers are fair-looking, intelligent women. One of the Mondores, Alonzo, we believe is something of a preacher and lays claim to considerable respectability. He goes to different sections preaching what he considers to be, and this is Black Southern dialect as a literary tool by the newspaper. Again, he's a Catskill New Yorker. He's not from the Deep South, but they quote him as the everlasting gospel. And I'm sure he sounded nothing like that. Continuing. Living in Prattsville town is also a white man by the name of Proper, living with a Negro woman, that's Alonzo's sister, Harriet, who says the only thing she ever did in her life that she is ashamed of is that she married Proper. This negress is Proper's second wife. Proper's first wife having been a white woman, by whom he had several children, one of them being a daughter, now about 14 years of age. In actuality, she was 17 at this time. The Reverend Mondore has during the past year made his home at Proper's more or less of the time. He has made himself familiar with this child daughter of Proper, and the result was that the girl became the mother of a buxom Negro child. We understand Mondore claims the paternity and seems not at all abashed at the result of his amalgamation of races. So they're just noting here that Alonzo, who, by the way, is probably in his 40s by this time, had married the daughter of Mr. Proper. She was 17, but of course, newspapers being what they are, they do like to sensationalize things at times. Next. So you can see that Alonzo and Anna had a very long-standing marriage. There's nothing in the record to say that there was any discord within the marriage or within the community for that matter. And we have all these children. Leonard lived until 1959. Ransom lived till 1954. Alfred, 1967. And Lena passed away in 1983, and people still remember Lena very well. And this is his very impressive, this is for Lester, very impressive gravestone at Prattsville. Next. So this recaps the Mondore men in the American Civil War. We have Alonzo, son of Jeduthan I. Jeduthan I, Alonzo. He's in the 20th United States Colored Troops, Madison, 51st New York. The children of Joseph and Sophia Sippy Helicus. We have George, Alexander, Albert. Many of these men all served in the 20th United States Colored Regiment. Charles Mondore was in the 1st U.S. Colored Cavalry, and he died shortly after the American Civil War. Nelson was his son. He died in 1865. Lewis died in 1864. These are men of that family who died during the war. Harriet Bacon had a son, Leander Bacon. He was in the 1st United States Colored Cavalry. Of course, the U.S. Army was segregated at that time. And Alexander and Jane Helicus had Isaac Helicus, who was a son-in-law to Harriet. and he died shortly after his discharge in New Orleans in October 1865. And there's the signature of Charles Mondore. All of these folks were literate. They could read and write, and they were all within the community, as except for Charles, as contributing, upstanding members of the community. Next. And here we go with George Helicus. George was with the 26th United States Colored Troops. Here they are training at Rikers Island, New York. I had mentioned that regiment having been formed in 1864, less than a year after the draft riots. And this is an imagined illustration of the Union commanding officer and his black troops of the 26th USCT at Galveston, Texas, at which time they informed the local population that the Emancipation Proclamation applied to them and that all the black enslaved people of Texas and the Confederacy were henceforth and forever free. And George, from Mondore Village, was there at that time. Next. So these are just some illustrations. Now, the man at the left is actually a Sicilian, but he has the look of a man who could easily pass for biracial. And as I said, Madison Mondore was in the 51st New York Infantry. And that regiment was at the Battle of Antietam, and along with the 51st Pennsylvania, charged across what became known as Burnside's Bridge, and was able to secure that part of the battlefield. And Madison Mondore was in that battle. Next. And just to show, again, life in the North and life in upstate New York, in this illustration of the 114th New York Infantry, GAR, there's at least one African-American man standing over towards the left. And that's the Grand Army of the Republic, the Union Veterans Organization, very influential in late 19th century America. And many GAR posts had black members. Some GAR posts in the South were segregated, but the posts in the North were, as a rule, and by their own national society, integrated. The GAR was the first national organization to be completely integrated in terms of the issue of race. Next. So this is just a list of the deaths of officers and men from 1865. And we just have, this is very useful information for anybody doing any research whatsoever. And these are the deaths. So we have on here, at the very bottom, we have 16 and 17. We have Lewis and Nelson Mondore, and when they died, and the other pertinent information. So, again, this is part of the framework of information that gives great detail into the lives of the people from our collective past. Next. So, Mondore Village, putting the pieces together. In 1847, brother and sister buy a 100-acre tract near Pratt's Rocks. Joel is living in Prattsville in 1855. In 1868, Joel purchases a 9-acre farm from the Christensen family. In 1874, Elizabeth, the widow of Charles Mondore, buys the Sippy Place. In 1874, Alonzo Mondore buys the house lot of Leroy Chamberlain on Washington Street. Alonzo had married the proper girl and had a whole bunch of children. In 1912, from Benjamin to Alfred Mondore, they actually reference in the deed Mondore Village. In 1928, the old Sippy Place is sold by the heirs of Elizabeth Mondore to Nancy Buell. By 1918, Alfred Mondore built a home across from the Methodist Church, which until not too long ago was still standing. And Madison and Sarah Mondore owned the land on present-day Route 2, and it was sold to Elmer Northrup in the 1930s, and at that time, it still had no electricity in the house. Next. Creating the Legend of the Mondores from 1897, elopement of Katie and Henry. Katie Clume and Henry Mondore. Mondore is the leader. Not all of the Negroes in that part of the Catskills are named Mondore. That, however, is the name of many who have long been acknowledged leaders of the various Negro settlements throughout that region. Years ago, so long that the oldest inhabitant of those mountains can but remember hearing the story in their childhood of a sturdy, muscular Negro, Joel Mondore, forsook his home and family and lived the life of a recluse. His mother was a white woman. The white folks shunned him on this account. Proud was the spirit of the Mondores. He carried off a white girl. He married her. And this, of course, is just total claptrap. But you got to do what you got to do to sell papers. Next. So this all comes about because Henry Mondore, the son of Jeduthun I, he marries a 17-year-old girl, Katie Clume, from a neighboring farm at Negro Mountain. Katie was underage. Henry was in his 40s, I believe. And this is a illustration of the abductor's home on Negro Hill. The issue here was not that she was white, it was that she was legally underage. But of course, papers being what papers are, they turned it into a case of miscegenation, and that sold papers. Next. So our friends in the Deep South from Montgomery, Alabama, got wind of it because it was a national news item. And here they are in December of 1897, just before I was born. The village of Grand Gorge, New York, is in danger of being treated to an object lesson which the people of that section are probably not prepared for. The papers have already had something in them about a white girl having been forcibly abducted by some Negroes and married to one of them. But the following is a detailed account as sent to the Topeka State Journal on the 30th of November. And I won't read all of that other than to say that they took this elopement of Katie Clume, who had an abusive father, running away with a very handsome man, Henry Mondore. They tracked him down. They had gotten married over in the Hudson River Valley area, and they went down to Mondore extended family members in North Jersey, in Bergen County, and that's where Katie's father found them, brought his daughter back. Henry hid out because he didn't know what was going to happen to him, but he turned himself in on the assurance that nothing would happen. The case never went to trial, and we'll see what happens in the next slide. Next. Okay, so they have a hearing in 1897 at the Grand Gorge Hotel, which is where the Sunoco station now is in Grand Gorge. And Ann Proper Mondore, Alonzo's wife, gives testimony that Katie's father was abusive. And then in the middle article, it says, what will be done now is difficult to see. The public is familiar with the abduction case last October. Mondore is now under indictment, but the girl is now of legal age and without doubt gives her consent to the marriage. Their former marriage was annulled by the court at Catskill. So here we are in 1898. A year later, she's 18. She's legally an adult, and the couple are married. They have children. The family still exists down in the Binghamton area. One of their great grandkids came to one of my presentations, and it's the family just loves this story because it's so thrilling. Even though it has certain racial negative connotations, it's just a artifact of the time that it was written. But generally speaking, all the Mondores I've worked with are extremely proud of their heritage. Next. So this is from 1917. And if we look down to the third line from the bottom, 20 years ago, the abduction of Katie Clume by Mondore Negroes brings to light a vendetta against white women, a fairy story of long ago. And that's from the Buffalo Times. And we can see it was still making the newspapers even 20 years later. Next. So the Negro Hill Homestead, it is on the road just outside of Prattsville in the town of Roxbury. So Jeduthan was dead by 1900. Jeduthan II was dead by 1900. The Mondore offspring operate a dairy farm. They operate dairy farms on nearby Ferris Hill Road and elsewhere, including Gilboa, other towns in Delaware County. Jeduthan, son of Ransom, was buried there at the homestead burial ground marked by a cross in 1939. That's the last known burial. So as recently as 90 years ago, it was still an active cemetery. So in 1903, Ransom and Polly Mondore to Mary Hardenberg of the famous Hardenberg home across the road, 13.5 acres, accepting and reserving from the grant a plot 50 feet square where the graves are located and a right-of-way to the said graves for the purpose of burial. Now, I went in and I looked at all the deeds, and lo and behold, when the land was transferred to the New York Water Authority, that little magical part of the deed was left out of that transfer. So that cemetery is still there to this day. Its protection as its own entity was magically erased from the deed records. So we can only imagine what other instances where that sort of thing happens. Next. So this is the Mondore Farm burial ground up on near Pratt Rocks. So who is in this little cemetery? Perhaps Shepherd? Perhaps Harriet Mondore Bacon proper? Perhaps one of her children, Caslin Bacon? These people just, there's no record of their burials whatsoever. And sometimes they just disappear from the written record. But this is probably their final resting place. And what had once been an open farmland of meadow and crop is now heavily forested. Next. And tracing the Bacon line, Shepherd Bacon and Harriet Mondore. We have the various children that go through the generations, and these are the descendants of the Bacon family to this day. Two sons are still alive, and there are grandchildren. And I went to see the man at the top photograph at his home in Harlem, and he knew he owned land in the Catskills, but he had never been there. And this is one of the grandsons out in Arizona. Next. And just a little more information about the irony of history. So Sarah Helicus was the white wife of Oliver Helicus. Again, they were all intermarried with the Mondores, and that's in 1915. And in 1930, by that time, Oliver had died, and Sarah had married Nicholas Fidek, a man from Romania, and his stepchildren were biracial. Actually, they're listed here as Negro, but they were biracial. So we have Charles and Oliver, etc. Next. There's a picture of the wife, Sarah. Those are the children, Charles, Oliver, and Josephine. Lillian, the daughter, is standing, and that's Lillian as an older woman. She was 1904 to 1990. She's the great granddaughter of Harriet Mondore. Next. And there's Charles Helicus wearing his World War II field jacket, biracial man, serving in the U.S. Army, not in a segregated outfit, totally integrated outfit. Next. Another son of Sarah Helicus was Oliver. He was a famous jockey, broke a lot of bones, went to work in Baltimore delivering food, a sandwich truck, and he got into an accident and was killed. His son was James. James was adopted by his aunt and her husband, Josie and Claude Decker. And that is a picture of James. He lived from 1944 until 2014. And again, you know, this is America. We mix, we blend. We all come from different ancestry and ethnic and racial groups. And that is the story of America. Next. And just to recap, the Lost Mondore Village of Prattsville, a story reclaimed, a story to share. Thank you. And next. That is my contact information. And I look forward to hearing from folks who wish to have more information or like to share any information about this or any other story. And that concludes my presentation.
Johanna, are you?
I'm here.
Okay.
I was just waiting for the screen to change.
To clear. Okay. All right. Fine. I'll shut up.
Okay. And I can't see myself, but that's okay. We don't have any questions yet. If anyone has a question, please put it into our question and answer, and we'll be glad to take it.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, this was really fascinating. I actually have a place in Prattsville up on Dog Hill. So many of the names you mentioned and the places are very familiar with me, to me. But and this you know, the charming story of the couple that defied the crazy, you know, racist things and was able to marry in the end. It's all great. So I'm really fascinated to learn about this. You mentioned the Hardenberg Big Stone Mansion, and that has always been rumored to have been a location on the Underground Railroad with so many Negro, as you put it, African American, mixed race, biracial people living in Prattsville. Might that actually have maybe been true?
Okay, so the short answer is no.
Oh, okay.
there are many places in the East, the Northeast, that claim to have Underground Railroad stations. Let's just look at it from 2 points of view. The first point of view is we're here in the Catskills. The escape routes for folks would be the travel corridors, specifically the Hudson River Valley. Folks are not going to be going through the mountains of the Catskills before the Civil War, when it's all dirt paths, scattered farms, almost a howling wilderness in most places at that time. And secondly, despite local legend, there's no historical record whatsoever that the Hardenberg House was a station. Similarly, local people assumed because there was a black family named Mondore, they must have worked for the Hardenbergs. That is completely also not the case.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I think there are a couple of questions there.
Yeah. Someone wants to see Richard on video. Can we do that?
I tried. I tried. I don't know. I'm technologically challenged. You can see me on Facebook and on YouTube. I have a channel, and I have a lot of presentations available on YouTube. If folks would like to email me, I'll be very happy to provide them links.
Okay, and this is from Dee Dee, our Huntertown historian. She says, I went to Hunter Tannersville School. What's the C? With Jim Helicus, who was always known as Jimmy Decker. I did not know Jimmy had passed on. That's kind of a statement, not a question, but.
Yeah, Jimmy was a descendant of Harriet, and he had been adopted by his aunt and her husband, the Deckers, and he was the son of Oliver, who was killed in that crash in 1944. But yeah, I mean, people, knew the Mondores, and I run into people all the time who knew the Mondores. Now, I'll mention something also. One of the Mondore descendants has Native American DNA, but that could be from anybody, but it goes along with the possible story. Secondly, there was a Mondore man killed in action at the end of World War II in Germany. His young brother is now Bill Mondore. He lives nearby in South Courtright. He's in his 80s. Bill and I are friends. Bill's DNA shows 6% African DNA. His grandchildren have 2% African DNA. So again, all through these generations, as they married local people, the DNA becomes more and more, I hate to use the word diluted, but I mean, that's just what, the process of DNA. But Bill Mondore knew that they were known as a quote unquote colored family back in the 1940s, 1950s. Although to look at them, you would never make that conclusion.
We've been trying to find some connections to African American people around the mountaintop area, excluding Prattsville, people who must have or did work at the Catskill Mountain House, at the Catskill Hotel, but it seems that they were all, I guess what you'd call transient workers. Once they had finished their employment, they left the area. They didn't stay and settle here. And we really don't know why.
Well, I do know that some of the Mondore offspring did move over, and forgive me, it was either they worked at either Hunter or Wyndham, which in my mind is a New Jerseyan or like the same. Forgive me, but there was an enclave of Mondore family members in Catskill as well.
Mm.
But the two lived in the Wyndham Hunter area did work at the hotels.
Mm.
And they lived there too.
Well, if you have any information about them that you could send on to me, I'd love to have it.
I'd be very happy to.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? We've got those two done. No? Well, then I guess we'd like to say thank you to Richard for his wonderful presentation. And we'd love to hear more. And we're definitely going to look at your Facebook page and see what other gems we can find that you've told us.
Well, again, thank you, folks. It's been my pleasure.
And I'd like to add my message of appreciation for you also as well, Richard, and thank you very much. And to then thank everyone for tuning in this evening, and to say we look forward to seeing you on March 1st for the presentation on Susie Barstow, and then for our in-person events that are starting in April, a poetry reading and discussion of early Catskill Mountain poetry in April, and then on May 26th, a talk on war dogs by Ron Gabriel about the role dogs played in assisting our American military. So I will be happy to wrap things up and to thank everyone for joining us again, and to say good night and goodbye for the evening.
Good night.